Welcome, my name is Gabriel, and today we're going to take a look at relationships in REI3. For those who've never worked with REI3 before, please take a look at our previous videos, especially the one on how to use the builder to build your first REI3 application. For everybody else who's already caught up, let's jump right into it. So what are relationships? When you build your application, you usually want to store stuff in it. Depending on the type of application, these can be stuff like IT equipment, furniture, documents, cars, employees, projects, tasks, or whatever you can think of. And sometimes you need to connect these different things, we call them entities, to each other. So for example, you build an application that manages a fleet of cars that your company owns, and employees can lend out these cars. So you want a relationship between those two, saying that this car is currently being driven by this employee. And as soon as you've modeled this relationship, REI3 knows that these two entities belong to each other, that they are connected, and then can offer corresponding inputs. So let's have a look into a system to see how it actually looks. I've prepared an example application so that we can take a look together. Let's jump right into it. So for this particular example, I've decided to model a school. On the left side, you can see our base entities. We have our students that are attending the school. We have classes that they can go to. We have semesters that they start in, and we have student theses that they are working on. So going to the students, we go look at Alice Ment, which is the first one here in the list. And we can see that Alice started in the semester of summer 2018. If we look at this input field here, we can open this drop-down, and then we'll see we could choose any of those semesters as a starting point for her. So we can change that, but as you can see, we can only have a single active value. If we go to the semesters now, we go into summer 2018, and we see from the other side that Alice Ment has started in this particular semester, but she is not alone. We have Gloria and Bernhard who started in the same semester as her. This is what we call a many-to-one relationship. And for those who've never worked with that, don't worry, we're gonna explain it now. So to see how it looks in REI3, we go into the builder, we go into the relations, and here we can see again our base entities, our classes, semesters, students, and theses. And the fifth one, this is a bit special, we're going to talk about it a bit later. But going back to our example, we go to our student relation. Here we see a couple of boring, easy ones like the date of birth, email, first name, last name, and a student portrait. That's nice. But interesting for us now is the first semester relationship. So we click on that attribute, and now we see it's a relationship with the type many-to-one, and it's connected to semester. Again, for those who've never worked with relationships in the past, I've prepared a handy diagram to try to explain it easily enough. So this is something that IT nerds like to draw. This is a relationship diagram in which you can see all the different entities and how they are related. So on the left side, we have our student relation. This is the thing that Alice is stored in. And on the right side, we have the connected entities. And for this particular example, we're talking about the semester. So we have one particular semester, so 2018 summer, and we have Alice. And Alice started in 2018 summer. But not only Alice started there, but other people as well. So we have multiple students that can start in the same semester. This is what we call N-to-1. N stands for multiples. So multiple students started in the same semester. And the nice thing about relationships is once you have them, you can turn them on their heads. You can ask, okay, for a particular semester, how many students or which students started there? So in the summer of 2018, in this one particular semester, what or how many students started there? And as you can see with these icons, this is also illustrated. Two dots going into one dot, so multiples going into one. Multiple students can start in the same semester. And the other way is one semester can be the starting point for multiple students. So this is n to 1, if you will, or 1 to n for the other side. If we go back into REI3, you see here the same icon that illustrates this. And if we go into the form for the student input, we see here the same icon again. This is the n-to-1 relationship. We select a single semester for each student, but it can be the same semester. So this is how that works. And if you create a new form or if you just delete that, you'll see that the corresponding input field is automatically offered if you have a student relation on a form, because this relationship has been modeled. So this relationship now exists. and therefore we can just drag and drop the first semester input into our form here. And then once we select which part of the semester we want to show, like the semester name, for example, we can see it down here. That's the entire thing. So this is called the n-to-1 or 1-to-n relationship, depending on which side you're coming from. If we go into the form for the semester, we can see the other side, 1 to multiples, so 1 to n. And here we see the attributes for the students that we want to select. So if we open this particular semester, we can now select multiple students. One last thing to know about n-to-1 relationships is that you have to put the relationship attribute on the relation that is the n. So in this case, we have our students and our semesters, and multiple students can start in the same semester. So you have to put the attribute on the student relation, as you can see here. That's the reason why when you create a new attribute, you only have the n-to-1 type, not 1-to-n. 1-to-1 is the next type that we're going to take a look at, and we're going to start right now. 1-to-1 relationships are actually even simpler, because 1-to-1 relationships work the same as n-to-1, but with the difference that on both sides we only have a single entity. So going into our diagram, we have the example of the thesis, and we can see one student can have one thesis, and one thesis can only belong to a single student. So as you can see with the dots here, one on one side and one on the other. Going back to the application, we can look at Alice, and Alice has a single thesis assigned. And if we look at the thesis on the other side, here we only have Alice assigned. So 1-to-1 means really what it sounds like, one on left and one on the right, and therefore it's very simple to do. On the relation level, in the case of 1-to-1, it really doesn't matter where you place the relationship attribute. You can put it on student if you want, or you can put it on thesis. It just needs to be on one or the other. And if we go into the attribute details, you can see the same icon down here. So this is the 1-to-1 relationship. So lastly, we're going to take a look at n-to-m relationships. So multiples on both sides. For this, we have an example of the classes which a student can attend. So on the student side, we have Alice, who is attending 4 different classes, as you can see here. And on the classes side, we have stuff like Math 101, which is attended by 4 different students, as you can see here. Going to our relation diagram, we now have our students up here and our class down there. And as you can see here, multiple students can attend multiple classes. Don't be confused by the M. This is just something that somebody thought of, that you shouldn't have N on both sides. So it's N-to-M, which just means multiples on both sides. So multiple students can attend multiple classes, and multiple classes can be attended by multiple students. And these icons also illustrate that. You can cross-connect every class with every student and every student with every class. The tricky part is that you still have to put that somewhere in your relations. And if we take a look, we now have this fifth relation that I can finally explain. Because with 1-to-n, n-to-1, 1-to-1, it's very simple. We just have a single relationship attribute placed on one of the partners of the relationship. But if you need nm, you need an extra relation. So in this case, we have our student class. So the student class relation is just a connection between student and class so that we can have an nm. So what you do is you have your class and you have your student. You create a third relation called student class. Well, you can choose another name if you like, but this is the naming schema that I always use. Just connect the two names together. And then you need a n-to-1 relationship attribute for both partners. So on student class, I have a n-to-1 relationship to class, as you can see here. And we have a n-to-1 relationship to student, as you can see here. So once you have a relationship in nm, you can go into any form, like on the student form. Let's go into the form editor, and here you can see the nm relationship input. When we delete that or when we create a new form, you can see, okay, I don't see it down here. Why is it not shown? The reason is that it's filtered out by default. You don't often use 1-to-n or nm at all, so these are just filters that you can toggle on off, and then you see other fields. So in this particular case, I'm looking for NM fields, so multiples to multiples, and now I can see that field, place it in here, and now I can select classes on the student form. The same thing on the class form. We have our student selection here, and if we delete it, now because NM is toggled on, we see our class to student input. So putting it here, and now we can select students for this particular class. So this is how NM relations work. So now that we've looked at all the different types of relationships that you can have, let's take a look at a couple of tools that help us work with relationships. So first of all, we go back into the builder, we go into our relations, and now we take a look at student. Down here we have the so-called relationship graph. Make a bit more space, open it up, and the relationship graph shows you what relations are connected and how they are connected. On the top you see, and you can filter by the types of relationships that you want to take a look at, so we can disable the one-to-one, for example, or n-to-one, and so on. In the graph itself, you see these arrows. You see the arrowhead that points from the source of the connection to the target. So here we have the first semester, which is located on student, pointing to semester. And here we have the student thesis, which is located on thesis, pointing to the student. And with the color, you can easily see what kind of relationship it is. Here we have the student class, which is 1 to n because it's part of the NM relationship. So if we would extend this graph, it would point to the other direction to the class for the n to m relationship. You can jump between those relations and see, okay, these are a bit simpler because there's only a single relationship on each of those. With student class, we see NM, it's a connection of n to 1 to both student and class, like we looked at before. So this is one helpful tool, especially later when you have a lot of relationships, to see where all those are pointing. One additional thing to consider when working with relationships is what happens when you delete reference records. So for example, we have our student Alice Ment, and she started her schooling in the semester of summer of 2018. And what would happen if we try to delete this semester? So let's take a look. We go into semesters, we select summer of 2018, and we try to delete it. Yes, we're certain. And now the system says, well, we can't delete it because it's still being referenced as first semester somewhere. So this is the default behavior. It is there to protect you because you might not want to delete stuff that is still important. But you can actually make that choice yourself. So going back into the builder, going into the relations, then to the student. And here we have our first semester relationship attribute. And you see down here we have additional options that we haven't talked about yet. So in this particular case, we are talking about the action when deleted. So what happens if the semester that is selected as first semester for this particular student is going to be deleted? The default action is the no action. So no action means that the system just blocks the deletion. You're deleting something that is still being referenced. Well, that is a bad idea, so we are going to block you. But sometimes you actually want this to be different. Sometimes you say, okay, these two records actually belong to each other. For example, when we look at a student and thesis, a student has one thesis belongs to a particular student. So if we delete the student for whatever reason, we might want the thesis to be deleted as well. This is the so-called cascade option. Cascade means that if we delete something, then all the connected records are also deleted. This is very useful for parent-child relationships. So if you have something like a task and subtasks, if you delete the main task, then all the subtasks should automatically be deleted. This is called cascading, and cascading means, well, we just follow you. You're being deleted, we are also being deleted. Just be careful if you put everything to cascade. With everything being cascade means that if you delete a single data set, then a lot of other data sets might be deleted even if you don't want to. So you should always be careful. The no action is the default for a reason. The third option is called the set null option, which means that if the data set that's being referenced is being deleted, then the reference is being emptied or set to null. This is to demonstrate when we go into ls-ment again. A very nice option, which would just mean that if we delete summer of 2018, then this field would be empty. But as you can see right now, this is actually not really possible because this is a must-have value, we can't just have this empty. So the system would not even work correctly in this case. It would just say, well, I can't set this because this must have a value. For the thesis, this would definitely be possible because thesis is not a must-have value. So if we clear this, this would work out fine. So if we say that the thesis should be set to null on deletion, then this would just be empty. So going back to our relationship attribute, if the first semester would not be a must-have value, like here, then we could say set null, and set null would mean, well, we just empty it if the reference record is being deleted. If it is a master value, then the set null will fail and, well, would not continue the deletion. And the last option is the restrict option, which is for database experts only. It's about when and how the check for it being valid is being done. So nothing we go into detail here. You will never use this, very, very likely. The same with the action when changed. Deletion is very simple. You just delete a record and then the system will decide should it block it, cascade it, or remove the reference. The change option only occurs when you change the primary key of a record. This is something that most people will never ever do, so don't worry about this option. My suggestion is just set it to the same option that you do the action when deleted. So when we say cascade, we set both to cascade. This is 99% of cases exactly what we want. But for database experts who know what they're doing, this is a very good option to have a different behavior when you change the primary key instead of when you delete a record. So this is the actions on deletion and change. So let's look at one last thing. A very useful option when working with relationships is to open reference records directly. So what that means is if we look at our student form, this is Alice, and now we have this button down here on the thesis called Open Record. The idea is that instead of going through your entire application, jumping between those different entities, you can directly jump into referenced records. So here in this case, I can click on this button, and now I can open the thesis directly. This is the Open Form option. When we look into the form editor, we can click on any relationship input field and click on its settings. And here down here we have the open form option. And right now it opens the form for thesis. So when we click on the button, which will appear if we have this active, it will open the corresponding thesis. If we go to a different student, Mr. Bernard has a different thesis. We click on the button. Now we see the thesis of Mr. Bernard. And another cool thing is that when we have a student that doesn't have a thesis assigned yet, which could happen, we can create a new thesis. And the student is automatically set up here so that we don't have to select him or her. And this is also an option that you can apply. So if we go into the field options, we say form open. Down here we have the option what happens when we create new records. And now we can apply our current student to the input field on a thesis form. So the idea is if you have a completely new student, now we want to apply or create a thesis for the student. We click on plus, and now the student is already pre-entered. And this is all there is to that. So let's see how this is applied when this option is not enabled yet. So let's go into the field for our first semester. And here we go into the field settings. And down here we have the open form option. This is how it looks when it is not enabled. So let's select a fitting form, the semester form. Let's say that we want to have a pop-up form. This option is that you don't navigate to the other form, but that it opens up in a new, smaller window. That is always very nice for this kind of data. So let's just set a pop-up form with a certain size. And when we go back, now we can click on this button, and now the corresponding semester is being shown. If we go back to Alice, same idea, we click on that, and now the semester is being shown that she's assigned to. You can also use that for NM. So if we go into the NM field for classes, we say we open the form for the classes, please. Pop-up form, why not? Let's make it a bit larger, please. Save. And now we have this button on each and every record. So we could look at Math 101. We could click on Modern History, and we see the assigned students. That is very nice. And depending on how much data you have, you can even choose different ways of making these inputs. So in this case, we have an NM, we have 4 classes. This is not a lot of data, so what we could do is we could go into the field settings and say we want to have a so-called category selector. When we enable this, now instead of a drop-down, we have checkboxes. Also works very nicely. And we can do the same things for all other input fields. So we can go into the theses, for example, and when we say category selector, now it's a radio menu because only a single value is valid. This makes sense for very small value pools, like if you have states and stuff like that. If you have very large value sets, like a list of students, then you should use a drop-down because drop-down can be filtered and has paging and so on. But if you only have a couple of values, then these category selectors are actually very nice. So this is how that works. Just to demonstrate one more thing, when we go into the field options, we have sometimes the so-called quick filter available, which we can enable. And if we go back to our form, we go down here. Now we have a filter up here where we can just type in values to directly filter the drop-down that we have. So this is another option. So you see there's a lot of options of how to deal with these relationship input fields. So that's basically it for this example. So let's wrap up. Relationships are one of the most important aspects of any application. So when you build your application with REI3, just keep in mind that creating your entities and deciding on sensible relationships is one of the most important decisions that you're going to make. They're not only there to provide input fields and stuff like that, but also for reporting later on for graphs, or charts, and so on. So sorry for this video taking so long and being so long in itself. It took a while to make because it's a very complicated topic to talk about. But thank you again for your attention and time. We'll be producing additional videos in the future. So goodbye for now and see you later.